Welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about what we know about the upcoming prequel series to the Friday the 13th franchise, Crystal Lake. And I'm actually pretty excited to see what A24 does with getting their hand on a slasher classic, but let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room real quick first, because I don't think this is going to be some type of mother-son tragedy. I think there is going to be this hidden direction that the show takes, and I think it's going to be in the psychological area, and I think they're going to use that to try to change the DNA of this entire show and franchise. And I think going forward, maybe the Friday and 13th franchise may be a little bit more of a psychological horror rather than just a straight up slasher. And I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, but the direction of this show and the way it appears to be going seems to be setting up more like a psychological horror slasher. And as long as they capture all three of those elements in the right way, I'm here for it. So let's go ahead and talk about the cold hard facts that we have about the show, and then we could break down exactly what we know about where this show may be taking us, or at least the general direction of where we're going heading into the October 15th premiere. So we finally got our real footage of the show yesterday, and from what we can pull from it and what we know about the show right now is it's going to be a full 8-episode series. And in those 8 episodes, you can see some of the characters aren't going to be in every single one, especially Pamela, who the show is based around. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But let's really talk about the timeline and some of the settings, because that's where everything really lies. So the plot of this show is going to take place in the summer of 1971. And as we see it pointed out in the trailer, it all started when that kid drowned last summer. And we know they're referring to little Jason. So it seems like the show is placing these events around about a year. I've heard it's about 9 months in the time frame in between when Jason drowns and when the show starts to take place. But whatever the amount of time is that Jason drowned, this happens after he drowned in the waters of Camp Crystal Lake. Now here we're introducing Pamela Voorhees. She's a single mother, and she's also a former singer who sacrificed her dreams all to take care of her son with special needs. And she gave up all of that, all to have some negligent teenagers not watching him, doing whatever they were doing, and he drowns in Camp Crystal Lake. But the synopsis tells us now that she's starting to put her life back together and trying her best to heal from this tragedy, the inciting incident seems to be when two strangers show up on her porch and aggressively start to dig up her past. Now, who are these strangers? They have not really been described to us yet, and we haven't seen them in the trailer footage either. At least they haven't been pointed out in the trailer footage. So are they journalists just trying to, see what happened to her son? Are they lawyers for the camp because we know they're going to try to reopen the camp? Are they just opportunists? Not really sure about that because this is taking place in the 1970s. But the press releases that I have read are keeping that part and those details very, very vague. But it does seem to run parallel with the camp opening up, but them arriving at Pamela's house seems to run parallel with the camp reopenings. And this is probably going to act as at least one of the catalysts for her eventually losing her mind and going on a killing spree. The other thing that we know is probably going to be a huge catalyst in this is going to be the trauma of losing Jason at this very camp that they're reopening. This is probably what's going to trigger Pamela's violent descent into a form of madness as she seeks vengeance for, the death of her son. And she's going to be seeking that against, as we know, the camp counselors who she deems at least to be responsible for the loss of her son. Now, I do like that the setting isn't some backdrop and that it's a isolated woody pressure cooker in the 1970s. But I really am looking forward to this story and this timeline that they're going with, because they're changing it a little bit, and I'm fine with that because I think we should kind of freshen it up just a little bit. It shouldn't just be the same thing over and over. But with that being said, I'm looking forward to watching this community explode or implode in real time. But speaking of the community, let's go ahead and talk about the characters that are in this show, because I think some of the characters and their backstories, and from what we know about the 1980 original film, I think this will kind of let us know that this is going to be a pretty dark story. So of course we have Pamela Voorhees, who's going to be the avenging mother of Jason Voorhees, and in this story, it seems like she's going to be somewhat protagonist and definitely going to have some antagonistic qualities about her as well. But knowing that she lost her son and that all of this is basically a revenge story, she is probably going to be viewed as a protagonist in a certain type of way, at least if they try to spin it that way. But we are going to watch a good self-sacrificing mother kind of go from being that into a psychotic killer. Now, I want to go ahead and get this out of the way because I saw this in one of the press releases, and that was a casting for an adult Jason. Now, they cast a 5'9" Zachary Branch into this role of an adult Jason, and it makes me wonder why they casted an adult version of Jason when we are in the prequel part of his life, especially when he drowns. He's around the age of 10. So I do think that the presence of an adult Jason kind of tells us that we are at least going to get some flash forwards. And like I said before, not everybody, including the main person, Pamela Voorhees, is in every episode. So maybe we start or end with the actual adult Jason. Then we have a character by the name of Enid, who seems to be our primary new character. I looked up the 1980 cast list, and there's no Enid in the cast list. So this is a very new character, original to the show. And it seems like she's going to be potentially one of the camp organizers because she's digging into the camp's history, the history of the operations, the things that are happening around the camp. And she's almost undoubtedly going to come across some of the dark things that have happened around the camp in the past. And I doubt that Jason John is going to be the only dark thing that has happened. But all that aside, the town is probably going to be trying to bury those dark secrets. Now, the biggest question to this is, since she's a new character, what side of Pamela will she end up on? The good side or the bad side? Because we know what will probably happen if she ends up on the bad side. Then for the hardcore fans, we have Officer Dorf. And if you remember Officer Dorf from the 1980 film, he was basically pretty useless, but he was one of the local deputies. But what they're doing different here in the series is they're giving him a larger role. So we're going to see some of the background of everything and how he is one of the people who will be investigating the drowning and death of Jason. And I think he's also going to be investigating some of the other weird occurrences around the town from the way it's described. So that's what made me say I don't think Jason dying is going to be the only weird or crazy thing that has happened in Crystal Lake. But we're basically going to see him in a younger form trying to solve what's happening before he turns into a conspiracy theory, before all the trauma of these events turn him into a unhinged skeptic. Now, supposedly there is a casting for a legacy role, which is probably the final girl role of Alice from the 1980s film, the sole survivor of the film. But who that is and who's going to be playing that role and what that role is going to entail is being kept under lock and key. So it probably has a role to go with what happens with this show and franchise going forward. So more on that whenever we get more development. So as of right now, I have no clue what this legacy role is. And then obviously we have young Jason. He's going to be the catalyst for everything that happens in this entire franchise. So no need to be surprised there. We have a young Jason cast. And I've heard they're going to accurately depict him with the makeup and he's going to have the physical deformities. But it seems like his role is going to be locked strictly into harsh, probably graphic flashback sequences. So I guess we'll see what happens with that. And with the death of Jason, because we all know he's not dead, takes Pamela on her journey to avenging her son. Then another legacy character they're bringing back Crazy Raph, the guy that was on the bicycle, warning everybody that there's something bad here. Or I think it was the town was doomed, or you're all doomed. Something along those lines. I can't remember right now. But this series is going to give us his origin story on how he goes from basically being a regular guy into the town crazy. And then another interesting casting that I saw was Barry and Claudette. Now, if you remember them from the film, you obviously have seen the film many, many times like I have, because those are two teenagers who died basically in the first minute and a half, 2 minutes of the film. And, they're just there to die. So in this series, they're actually getting full roles, and we're going to see the roles that they play into allowing Jason to die, and what obviously undeniably will lead to Pamela eventually butchering the two of them. So that'll be pretty fun to see how that dynamic plays out. Since we already know how they will ultimately end up, it'll be nice to see what really led to her butchering them. Maybe they go last. They probably do go last. Or maybe they don't go last. Maybe they go first because in the film, they do kind of die in the beginning. So they shouldn't have a long role. They'll probably be in a couple of episodes. But whenever the killing starts, it'll probably start with them. Because as you saw in the trailer, there's somebody on a stretcher with dark hair. That's probably Claudette, and that's probably what gets the frenzy going. So I do think they're going to go out of their way to honor the legacy a little bit while they explore new lore and a new way to freshen up and explore the Friday the 13th franchise. But one of the things that they're keeping the same is Pamela Voorhees. As I said before, she's obviously going to be our core antagonist at some point. but I do think we're going to spend some time with her as the protagonist of this story. Now, the difference they do have with her character, the way it seems from the 1980 film, is instead of just being motivated just solely by the death of her son, it seems like in the series, she's going to have some type of psychological fracture, and that's going to drive her into this vengeance direction. And we can hear from the trailer when she says, "Mommy's here." Now, when does she say that? I don't know, but the way it's said is pretty creepy. It could be said when Jason's born because we see a flashback of that when he's born, or it could be a situation where we see her standing at the lake and she says it there. So not sure when she says it, but whenever she does say it, it's going to be really creepy, and we already know what's to follow with that. Now, some of the major differences that they have is obviously in the film, it took place in 1957, the drowning of Jason, and then all the murders and everything took place 23 years later, leaving Jason basically be a grown-ass adult when he started his killing spree in part 2. But this show is taking place with the drowning happening in 1970, and then all the murders and everything kicking up in 1971. So I doubt they're going to have this 10 or 11-year-old Jason going around here doing a murder spree. So that's why I think the casting of an adult Jason is kind of interesting, because it signals to me that there may be some flash forward or just an all-out time jump at some point in the future. And maybe that's the direction we'll go with the franchise. Or maybe that'll lead into a feature film. I'm not sure what they're doing or how far they plan this out, because this could be a lot like the It series over on HBO, where they do random time jumps explaining a story. So there's nothing saying that they couldn't jump from 1971 to 1985 and we have a full adult Jason. But I want to talk about my quick theory about the show and what I think is going to happen based off what I know about it so far. And we see the campfire dialogue, we see the stretcher with the black hair hanging out, and that's more than likely Claudette. And then we hear the audio talking about there's something in the woods. And then if you look at some of the pieces in the trailer where we see Pamela with Jason in the hospital, where we see her standing out over the lake, and then we see at the end of the trailer where she's covered in blood. This isn't just about Pamela's descent into madness, and I've said that a couple of times in this video, but I do think it is a psychological misdirection. So the secret that I think the studio is really hiding here is that I think Pamela is going to play the role of a unreliable narrator, because I talked before about the adult version of Jason being cast in this show. And what I think is really going to be happening with that is we're probably going to see the adult Jason committing some of these brutal murders. And if we do, I hope we see the adult Jason with the bag over his head with the one eye. Or maybe we just see an unmasked Jason deformed in just an adult version. But I think that's going to lead us to believe what we already kind of know, that Jason did not drown in the lake and that he's really still alive and he grew up as a hermit in the woods. But the twist here is this probably isn't the real adult Jason. I think this will be all in Pamela's head. Obviously, we see in one of the trailer shots a knife being held out. I don't think we see the hand, and that's probably done on purpose. But I think Pamela is the one, and we clearly know she's the one who's physically committing all of these murders, but her fractured, traumatized psyche is projecting an adult version of Jason, an avenging version of the son that thinks drowned in the lake, doing all of the wet work for her. But obviously by the end of the season, we'll all learn that it was one big illusion this entire time, and that it was her, Pamela, doing all of this killing the entire time. Like the film. And at least one of those shots that we may get of that is her drenched in blood after she murders Barry and Claudette. So I think the overarching plot is about the birth of a monster's delusion and not about the resurrection of one. So where do you guys stand? Are you genuinely excited for A24's twist on the Friday the 13th franchise with this first prequel series in Crystal Lake? And do you think this is going to be the start of some type of new Jason universe? I guess I shouldn't call it a Jason universe because it's just Jason and he just does all the slaughtering by himself. But do you think this is the start of another Jason franchise? Because I guess if this was a universe, the only other story that most of us would probably be interested in hearing is the one who about eventually kills Jason, at least in the films, and that's Duke. So if they're not going to go that route, I don't think we need another spinoff or a sequel series, unless this happens to be in the same universe as maybe the Friday the 13th franchise, or I doubt this is ever be in the Halloween franchise or in that circle. So maybe they'll go not the Friday the 13th franchise, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So I doubt they'll go that way, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Are you excited for this show? Are you not excited for this show? Would you rather just prefer the film? But let me know what you think in the comments. Please don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out. And I appreciate you all for coming, and I will see you in the next one.